We've had an interesting morning, haven't we?
Dude, I'm so fed up with it.
So, but like, because I mean, I know we're a little crunched for time, but I did want to like, so for those who don't know, Justin, kind of explain what's been going on this morning, because
Justin,
it's I'm sure it would have been entertaining for those watching from the outside looking in. So
okay, so for the audience, my knowledge is very specialized in one unique area, and everything else outside of that, I'm pretty dumb in, including audio, video, streaming, and recording, and everything similar to that. Luckily, Landon has a background in all this stuff, and he can do it for me from 1,000 miles away and do it virtually. And dude, I don't know what I would do without you. This would not be a thing if it wasn't for you and Ben and Matt, like and Sean. That you get like this would not happen because I would just throw a laptop through. But anyway, so here we are. We made it finally.
yeah, we got up different time than normal. We got up around. Well, I mean, we started kind of working kinks out around 8 o'clock, but I imagine we both got up around 7:30 this morning, and which is a bit different for us. Normally we record in the evenings, but we decided we would knock this one out this morning. But yeah, here we are. This is episode 5, and Justin, you sent me a message a couple days ago about, well, not a couple days ago, it was yesterday, about kind of the topic you thought that we should cover today. And what was that topic, or what is that topic?
Yeah, so I sometimes I hear this just like around society and on social media and stuff about how relationships change people. And
Yeah.
I thought that would be a unique and interesting kind of thing to talk about. So, because as you know, Landon, my background is I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. So, couples counseling, relationship counseling, that's kind of my whole deal. And
Yeah.
and so I thought that would be fun to just kind of explore that a little bit and see what we could come up with.
Yeah, yeah. And since you're throwing your title out there, I'll go ahead and throw mine out there as well. Since we haven't really done that yet, I guess I would be the producer on this show. I'm kind of the I hate to use this. I feel like it's overused, but kind of the brains behind the more creative aspects of things. Whether like if I feel like things are sounding good, looking good, all that good stuff. I won't bore the audience with the mumbo jumbo and the work that goes into that, but just know that is my role here. Um,
Guys, he's being bashful. I would never have been able to set this up this morning if he hadn't been there for me to like get some help with. So definitely,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah. It's well. I mean, we wouldn't even have content or anything to talk about without you. So it's definitely a joint effort for sure, for sure.
Definitely.
Going back to the today's topic, was there anything, and maybe not, and if so, that's okay. But was there anything that sparked that idea that you wanted to talk about this week? Did something happen? Did you have an interaction, or was it just off the? And if it was just off the dome, that's fine. But I'm curious how that came about.
Sure, man. So a lot of it came from doing a lot of couples work in the last couple of weeks
Mm.
and kind of explaining a similar concept in a variety of sessions because I think it's something that lots of people hadn't always intuitively thought about. But then when it gets pointed out for everybody that I've talked to about it, they go, man, that makes a lot of sense in a way that I had never really considered. So I thought, well, maybe that'd be something that we could kind of get into in the podcast. So it's a little bit of that, and then just a little bit about the off the top, just kind of what seems to fit right now.
Cool, cool. Well, yeah. I mean, let's get started then. So I guess we can just start by just posing the question: why is it that people change whenever they enter a relationship? Now, this can fork off, as you know, into different paths. It can fork off romantically into friendships, even like as far as like having a coworker, because yeah, you may not be like that person's best friend, but there is an element of relationship there because you're spending, roughly, 8 hours a day with a coworker. So, do you any direction you prefer to take that, or
Yeah, yeah,
what we can
yeah.
hit first?
Definitely so. But for, because, Shelly's thinking about doing some shorts for us. So tee up the question again, and I'm going to give like a brief 3-second answer, and then we'll get into some explanation there. Go ahead and tee me up again.
Okay, so let me pose the question again. So, what is it about people that whenever they enter a relationship, things change? Or not, rather, I mean, things do change, but rather they change as a person, whether that's romantically in a friendship or maybe even like a situation like a coworker.
Okay. So if the question is, why do relationships change people? The answer
Hmm.
would be because they have to. Because they have to.
Interesting.
Why do people change in relationships? Because they have to. Because they have to. And that's kind of the thing I wanted to unpack a little bit. So you know me, man. There's 100 different ways we could go. And for the
Yeah.
sake of time, we got to narrow it down for the sake of conversation. So there's a certain idea that I think would be good to unpack first. So when we think about relationships, oftentimes people think about romance, and this is definitely part of it, right? There's definitely an element that can be applied to that. But let's zoom out for a second and talk about relationships in general, like you talked about, whether that's friendships, coworkers, friends, romance, whatever it might be. In any two-person dynamic, there are three parts. There is you being your own individual person, your own set of beliefs, assumptions, actions, meaning making, connections that you have, and all those things in your own experience. So in any two-person relationships, there's the you element of things. Then there's the me element of things, who I am, what I bring to the table, what my assumptions are, what my beliefs are, the way that I make meaning of the world and how I interact with it. And the third part is something that's not always very intuitive, but I think that we may always kind of have a certain awareness about, and that's this third mysterious part that I introduce now. So in any two-person relationship, there's you, there's me, and then there's this mysterious thing that I'm going to call us. So there's you, there's
Okay.
me, and there's us. And that us thing is the overarching pattern between that connects two individuals in any particular kind of way. And so, have you ever, Landon, had a interaction with somebody, and you're meeting them maybe for the first time, and even on a subconscious level, you might not always realize when you're doing this, but you might be kind of analyzing them a little bit, trying to kind of feel them out, kind of see what they're about. And you might get to a point over a series of interactions where you say, you know what? There's nothing wrong with that person. Like I don't see them in any kind of negative light. But we just don't click. We just don't
Yeah.
jive. We just don't mesh. You ever had that happen before?
Yeah, I have. And it's funny. So, I mean, obviously, you know me really well. And I think you've heard me say this before, but for better or for worse, because there's both good and bad to it. But just to kind of give everyone some insight into just who I am as a person, particularly when I meet people. I have I don't want to call it an issue because it has served me well sometimes, but I have a characteristic where whenever I meet someone new, I immediately size them up. And I don't size, and let me be very clear, I don't size them up in the sense that like I think I'm better than them and like I want to see if they're like up to par. Like that's not what I mean by that at all. What I mean is I'm just kind of like, what's this person about? Is this somebody that would align with like it? I kind of immediately start thinking, is this somebody that maybe I would want like in my life, or somebody that I would want to interact with on a consistent basis? And so, like I said, that has served me well sometimes, and sometimes it's probably made me be a bit harsh about things maybe I shouldn't have. What was the original question? I'm sorry, Justin. I went on a little bit of a tangent there.
That's
but,
all right. The question being like, have you ever noticed that there's nothing necessarily wrong with the other person, and it's not even that you have any like qualms about it. It's as much as it's the us component. The thing when we're together, it just doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel organic. It doesn't feel natural. And
Oh, yeah.
it's just not something you really want to spend a lot of time on.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that happens. I think most people would agree that that's probably more prevalent in like the workplace. Because, I mean, I don't think some people do choose to be there, but there is an element of, well, we have to be here and we have to interact with these people.
Right.
So I think I run into that more either A, like at a workplace, or B, if I'm interacting with someone else's social circle. Yeah.
Right. We notice it on those levels because it's uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable, it's just different. We notice it more when in different situations. But when we think about interacting with anybody, there is always a feeling out process. For anybody who's ever like had a strictly online friendship with somebody, And then if you were to meet them in real life, you'll quickly find out whether or not this is like a sustainable friendship or whether or not they're just cool online friends that we don't really want to, spend a lot of time with in real life. Reason being is because when we interact with each other, there is a feeling out process that all of us do. Because what we're trying to do, Landon, is trying to understand the rules of this relationship, the expectations of this relationship, the way information and meaning is exchanged between the two people. And because of that, there's this kind of dance trying to figure out what is comfortable, what is not so comfortable, what are the depths of that relationship. And what we're doing is we're building the us. Because if I bring me to the table, you bring you to the table, through a conversation, through several interactions, or maybe even through one interaction, we're feeling out what the us is going to be like. And so what we might notice is, for instance, if you go on a date with somebody that you've been talking to online, and now you're sitting there and you're feeling them out and you're just trying to understand the rules, trying to understand the expectations, trying to communicate your own expectations, and trying to see, can those things fit together? You might be finding yourself say, for whatever reasons, this doesn't feel very very good or very comfortable, or maybe it does and it's comfortable enough to kind of keep going and see what happens. But what's happening in between you is the mutual exchange of expectations and trying to align certain things and communicate certain things and picking up on what the other person is communicating to you. And there's this kind of mutual exchange of that. And that's why normally those first interactions are a little bit difficult to build a lifelong friendship with. We need repeated interactions because it allows for that continued mutual sense of exchange. And then we have an ability to have some sense of consistency or stability within that relationship. And then we can start building, again, more expectations on top of that really can start to dictate what kind of friendship or what kind of relationship that this is going to be. So again, to re-highlight the point, there's always the individual, the other individual, and then the relationship between. And that's something that definitely plays a part in a relationship. And this is why you can have two people who can say, I really care about that person, and I know that they really care about me. And it just doesn't work. It's just not working. And what they're talking about, what they're highlighting there, Landon, is they say, well, there's nothing wrong with them, and I don't really believe there's anything wrong with me. But there's something wrong with the us. There's something wrong with the thing in between.
Would you say that's really so? Well, a couple things I want to hit on, because there's a lot that really kind of lit things up in my mind as you were talking there. So the first thing I wanted to bring up is I find it very interesting that as people, whenever we're wanting to enter into let's say friendship with someone that we meet, I feel like people have a tendency, not all people, there are definitely people out there who struggle maintaining friendship or acquiring friendship. But I find it interesting that for the most part, people will let acquiring friendship happen naturally over a period of time. However, if people are trying to accomplish a romantic relationship, the idea is to put yourself directly in front of a person that you've never met before and just immediately, and I'm not saying this is the right or wrong approach, I'm just saying this is what we do as people. We immediately put ourselves in front of someone, and we pretty much, we don't tell them everything about themselves, obviously. And if you do, that's probably not the healthiest approach, but that's a different episode. It's just interesting how when we want friendship, we kind of let it develop naturally over time. We have a tendency to let that happen more than we do whenever we want romantic relationship. Instead, we put ourselves right in front of someone, and we're immediately we're already asking questions and talking about things that are way different before we've even built the friendship part. And
Yeah.
so, and that's
Grab that one?
yeah, go for it.
Grab that one. Okay, so
Yeah.
think about that for a second. You talked about how it's easier for a lot of people to build friendships maybe than to take that step into romance. Why is that? Because the expectations in a relationship that's romantic is different than the expectations in a relationship that's just friendship. We don't expect the same kind of ways that things go about. We don't expect the same process in a friendship than we do in a romantic relationship. And this is why you hear people, I think, talk a lot about, like, if I'm dating somebody, I want to be able to be friends with them first and then take that step into romance rather than the other way around. Because what they're paying attention to is that the us in between them needs to be established and consistent before we talk about raising expectations. And that's different when you go into something and you never met somebody and you're immediately going to that branch of romance, because now we're not only are we trying to like get a read on the person, we're also trying to like really think about how we're presenting ourselves and how we're being interpreted ourselves. And that sense of anxiety comes from that elevated sense of expectation that like this might be a next step. This might be a higher form of relationship than just friendship, and we can almost feel the weight of that in some instances, in some situations.
Yeah, as I've gotten like older, as I've gotten older, I've realized that, and you hear people say it about like dating, like, well, you need to be their friend first. And I can remember like younger me, not that I ever thought that was necessarily bad advice, but like, younger me, I think naively thought that, well, yeah, but sometimes that can also get you to a destination that maybe you don't want to be at. But as I've gotten older, I think I've like truly wrapped my head around what people really mean by that. And like, as cliche as it sounds, and as many times as you've heard people say, like, well, you need to be their friend first before I think it's very true.
Right. What that roughly translates into, Landon, is you need to go into it with reasonable expectations. And that's why I think we hear people talk about the friend zone, and that might be a whole other episode.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was alluding to when I said like when I was younger. Yeah, that's a whole other thing. We don't have to get too much into that, but it's
sure.
But like we're not going to pretend that that's not like. I mean, that's definitely a thing that and we are predominantly a men's podcast, so sure. I think there's plenty of men out there that can maybe relate to, like, it's buzzwordy, but I mean, it's a thing, like, sure. That is a thing that happens and occurs, and that is something that men experience.
Sure. And we can definitely, if anybody be interested in it, we could make a whole another podcast about the friend zone thing and what to do and
sure.
maybe how to navigate that. But for the sake of the depth of this one, I think to go back to it, man, like, the us part is in every single relationship that we have. There's a reason why, Landon, you don't orient yourself 100% the same way that you do when you and I are hanging out versus when you and your parents are hanging out, right? Yeah. There's a reason why you don't go into your job and behave a certain way that you might behave in other contexts. Now, some people are
my coworkers might disagree with you on that one.
Maybe, but
maybe.
Now,
but I know what you mean.
There's carryover. But most of the time, we're always making these adjustments. Now, some people think that making those adjustments would be considered being fake. I would argue that we're always shifting based on the nature of the rules and the expectations of each individual relationship. And not only that, but we're also governed by the us part. So to go a slightly different direction with that, this is why you can be friends with several individuals, but for some reason, whenever you guys are all together, it takes on a different thing. You can be individually good friends with 7 different people, but for some reason, when all 7 of you are hanging out or all 8 of you are hanging out, you don't feel comfortable because the us of the collective has an influence on you as an individual, and it has an influence on them as an individual, and it shapes both of you. And this is why we can be friends with lots of people, or even like speak romantically to several people or whatever. And but then as soon as it starts to take that turn on the us level, it changes how we feel, our comfort level, or even our anxiety levels, or whatever it might be, because the us is shaping who we are individually. And we individually are shaping the us that is the whole of the relationship. So I hope this doesn't get too bogged down in the weeds.
No, I follow.
But I think that like it's good to know that kind of stuff, because I think that ultimately shapes every process of building a relationship. So let's talk a little bit about communication there, Landon, because if there's one thing that when we talk about friendships or romance, or even like people who are in sustained relationships, communication is always big. So communication is how we build the us in any relationship that we're in. So when we think about communication, many people will immediately go to verbal communication, and that is certainly a big part of it. How we
And I'd also
speak.
like to add, not to cut you off, but I'd also like to add that I think when a lot of people hear like communication is important relationship, they immediately snap to a romantic relationship. And while that's true, I would heavily argue that just relationship across the board, like
Relationships
period.
across the board. Now,
Yeah.
it feels heavier in romance because, again, the expectations are different, right? And the rules a lot of times are different if there's mutual understanding of romance. But
Gotcha.
when we talk about communication, it's natural to go to verbal, and verbal is a big part of it. How we speak and what we talk about is communicating a whole lot of stuff, and it's communicating how we see the world, what we think, what we feel, what we seem to know. But then we have the other side of it, which is the them in this, and the you in this case, who's also interpreting these things and providing feedback, and that's an important element. But let's talk about the other levels. So we have what's said, we have what's not said, which can be just as important, right? The things that aren't talked about, the things that aren't covered. Then we have the body language element of things. Then we have my favorite one, which is silence. So the silences between even can carry certain meanings and certain communications. And for those who know, because we talk about, well, I know we're bouncing back and forth between relationships in general and romance, but have you ever heard of someone having a thought in their mind that the other person is ready to branch over into romance, but it hasn't been really stated? They just are kind of doing this dance, waiting for somebody to say, "Hey, we're taking this next step," and we're constantly one person is constantly trying to like read through the lines, read the body language, read what's being said, what's not being said, the way they're talking about it, not just what they're saying, but how they're going about doing it, and trying to understand what all that means. And there's like this weird tension. You ever heard of that before? You ever seen that before?
Yeah, I think some people, I mean, of course, I think some people interpret that. And I'm not saying I interpret it this way one way or another. I'm just putting it out there. I think some people interpret that as quote unquote playing games, or it can be interpreted that way. I've heard that. I've heard that a lot. Yeah.
It can be. What we're doing in that moment is we're trying to understand, is it okay to advocate to change the rules to this relationship or to change the expectations to this relationship? And what we're trying to figure out is it mutual? If it's mutual, then we can both take that step. But we're trying to use that communication. We're trying to like view the other person, and we're trying to maybe even send signals that we're ready for that.
Is it like kind of like dipping your toe in the water, checking to see, is this a mile marker we're ready to cross? Is this how are they going to feel if I do this? Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly what it is. I mean, think about it, Landon. Like when you go, when you're hanging out with somebody who you're romantically interested in, right? And you might see, because of maybe some nonverbal or maybe some body language or maybe some selective silence or the way they look at you or something like that, that makes you think, oh, they might be interested in me. So then you make a pass, something subtle. Nothing overt, nothing spoken, but you're kind of like trying to do a little bit of this or a little bit of that, and you're just seeing what they pick up on and how they interact with it. And what you're noticing is that you're going to like be watching their reaction to the little things to see if they're picking up on it or not. And maybe you become more obvious with it over time, or maybe you become less obvious with it over time. But if you continue to try that and it's not being received, you might end up finding yourself being like, you know what, I'm not interested anymore in trying to raise the expectations of this relationship. Or you might be sensitive to the other person sending signals that they're ready to raise the expectation of this relationship. And all of a sudden you find yourself kind of analyzing, okay, I need to be really careful about what signals I'm sending because I'm not trying to do that. But we may not want to say that like overtly. We might not want to say, hey, let's have a whole conversation about it. We might be doing this dance, trying to negotiate the us and make sure that we have mutual aligned expectations and understandings about what a relationship is and maybe what it's not so much.
Man, Justin, you make relationships sound so easy. It sounds like the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Why can't we all know this and do this, right?
Right, right. We
I
all
do want. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no.
I was just gonna say, I do want to kind of pivot there. So let's kind of take, because we kind of covered the romantic stuff there for a little bit. Let's kind of pivot and talk about just friendships in general, because while obviously the romantic side is important, and there's entire other podcasts dedicated to talking about nothing but that kind of stuff. And I'm sure we'll cover more aspects of it in future episodes. But I do want to pivot to friendships, because I think that that is probably predominantly what even more people are experiencing. Or I guess there's more. I guess if you were to like take a sample size of relationships, there's probably more friendships occurring than there are romantic relationships. So I guess I kind of want to pose a question to you, Justin. So I know we've kind of talked about the big picture, right? We've talked about, how people can like change, or how we like adjust ourselves depending on the people that we're around and the situations we're in. What are some things that maybe you've caught yourself doing in the I guess the realm of friendships, and you can take that anywhere. You can talk about when you were younger, you can talk about now, you can talk about maybe something that was an adjustment for you. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to throw that at you and see how do you think that the friendships that you've acquired over the years, how do you think that has changed you as a person?
I think if we go back to that idea that relationships change people, I'm definitely in that category, right? And the types of relationships that I've been involved in, and I think all people that we're involved in, shift and subtly can alter our definitions of what friendship even is, or our definitions of who I think I am, or who I think the other person is. All those things are constantly being shaped. And I really want to highlight that, Landon, because I think a lot of times folks think that who I am as an individual, or who anybody is as an individual, is like a fixed set of personality traits that is consistent and maintains across all relationships and never changes from the time a person is born to the time a person dies. And although there might be some element of truth to that, the foundations may be there, but the way that comes across, and the way that interacts, and the way that we learn and grow comes about through relationships. And so, to go back to your original question of like, how has that kind of stuff changed me? When I started to be around and associate with people that I didn't really feel like I was similar to, but I wanted to be similar to them. When I started spending time around them and feeling out those relationships, it made me a better version of myself. It wasn't because I was similar to them. It was because I wanted to be. And I knew going into it, because obviously I have a background in this stuff, right? So I knew going into it that by putting myself around people that I wanted to be similar to, that was going to help me become similar to them. Not because I was already similar innately in myself, but because I knew that the connection between myself and the other person was going to help me become more similar to them. And so by associating people, or with people who are, for instance, more in line with the faith that I practice, or more in line with certain goals that I have, or more in line with a similar vision of the future that I have for my life, or even how I want to navigate the day in and day out difficulties of things, in order to create the type of experience that I wanted to have individually. I knew that I needed to be around people who were going to help bring that side out of me, because I know that the us is going to shape me just as much as I'm going to shape the us.
And I think it's important to highlight that I think a lot of what you're alluding to there is hanging around people that can change you for the better. But I also want to highlight that depending on who you spend your time around can also change you for the worse. And that's a side of that argument that I think a lot of people forget about, including me. There's definitely been people in my life that I've let into my life. I've spent time with them, and over the course of a time period that took way longer than it should have, because I had this idea of like a friendship that I wanted to occur, or even a romantic relationship for that matter. I realized after some time, unfortunately longer than I probably would have liked, probably would have saved me a lot of a headache and whatnot. I realized, this is not a person I need to share my life with, both, in really any capacity. And yeah, I guess I just kind of wanted to add that as well, that there are two sides of that coin, and I think it is very important that you filter the people in your life, because whether you admit it or not, because I know it's very trendy and popular to be like, well, nothing influences me and I stand on my own 2 feet, but it's just not like on paper, like objectively, factually, whatever term you want to use, it's just not true. Like,
It's not true.
Your environment will shape you.
Absolutely. Two things that you said about that I'm glad you brought up, because I really want to highlight this. And that is, you talked about the influence of relationships when it doesn't go very well. So there's two sides to that I think would be worth pointing out. So for our listeners on the other side, I would say that if there's any takeaway I would want you to have, is that we are always being shaped and changed through relationships. And even if it doesn't really feel like those things are happening, even if it feels like we're just maintaining or sustaining what we already were, that even that is an ongoing and active process. The other side of that, like you were talking about, Landon, is that just like you will grow and shift and change individually, when that happens, when one side of a relationship changes or grows or begins to have different individual expectations of themselves, of life, the world, people, etc., then when that happens, the us in every relationship that person is involved in or with will also have to shift. And this is why we feel as if we outgrow relationships.
And that's a painful process. I've gone through. And I think everyone will at some point in their life, but I've gone through the process of feeling like I've outgrown an individual, and that can be hard.
Because what happened in that situation there, Landon, is you grew individually, you shifted, you changed a little bit individually, and because of that, it made the us no longer sufficient for your sense of connection. And in that relationship, think about that person. I don't know who it is you have in your mind, but think about that person for a second.
Sure.
Think about how when you first noticed that things for you had changed, you didn't walk away from that relationship immediately. What happened was you did, whether consciously or unconsciously, you did certain actions to signal to the other person that it was time to change the rules of this relationship, the expectations in this relationship. And once they showed you that either they were not willing or not able or didn't desire to, that's when you started to make the decision that maybe I've started to outgrow this thing.
In the moment, now that because I'm revisiting a couple instances in my life where I've had to basically and I think this is kind of what you're saying, basically draw the line in the sand and be like, this aspect of this relationship I will no longer allow, or I'm outgrowing, or however it is you want to phrase that. I can remember in those moments it being very painful, because I've experienced what we're talking about right now. I've experienced both on the romantic side of things, but also with friendships. And I remember in those moments, like, it really hurt me, like, going through that process. But and the reason I'm saying this is because I want to encourage guys out there who maybe are drawing lines in the sand, that maybe need to move on from people that are maybe bringing their life down, is that, like, no matter what, letting go of that's going to be hard, because there's an attachment there. There's an element of attachment there. But coming from me as someone who's gone through some of those things, I can promise you that it works itself out. If there's a line that you have drawn and you realize that you're outgrowing a certain aspect or a certain individual or a certain aspect of the relationship, I would say that in the moment it hurts, but now that I'm on the other side of those things, it had to happen. and it was better, and it was better for myself, and honestly probably for the other person too, in some ways. I can't speak for them necessarily, but it well, it helped me grow, and it helped me realize, it helped me put another notch in my belt of, because like growing up is learning, right? You learn when you're younger, you learn there's some things you think you want, and then you get it and you realize you don't want it. There's some things you don't want, and then you get it and you realize, oh, I need it.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of learning experiences, and those relationships I'm alluding to are just examples of things that I thought I wanted, or things that I had at the time, and then I realized that long term were not good for me, and that it was time to move on. So,
and it's equally possible that what you had in that relationship was exactly what you needed at a certain time. But then as you grew, and as you learned, and as you experienced certain things, that shifted the things that you need now. And
yeah, absolutely.
That can create some discomfort in relationships of all kinds. And there will come a time where we have to try to renegotiate the rules and the boundaries of a relationship, when it doesn't feel as if there's a whole lot of hope or optimism that that renegotiation process is going to be something that's mutually beneficial for both of us. Then we have to make the decision. Somebody has to make a decision on whether or not it's worth continuing this relationship, or maybe it's worth continuing the relationship, but we need to step down our expectations. Maybe, for instance, this person who used to be a really good friend of ours, because of the individual growth that's happened, or maybe because of our perceptions of the other person, how they've shifted over time, maybe this is now a relationship that needs to be stepped down to someone I see every once in a while, maybe a casual acquaintance. Maybe I need to not spend time with them at all. But it's this process of understanding that certain things, as you grow, will shift. And as they shift, you'll need to stay in tune with that. And that comes back to something, Landon, that you and I talk about all the time. I think we've said it on this format a few times. It all comes back to knowing yourself. Knowing yourself. Knowing that you're growing all the time. Knowing that you're, in some ways, sometimes small, sometimes big, you're changing. And everyone is doing that. Everyone is constantly establishing and renegotiating boundaries, expectations, and meanings. And it definitely happens in relationships. And so when you start to come together with somebody, think about that. Think about how you have grown and changed in the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. You can see when you zoom out that it's different now. Think about the friendships you had those years ago, how they've changed, how your expectations have changed, what the things you are, what the things that you need are now in relationships compared to where you were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And remember that that process was happening gradually. And as you mature and as you grow and as you learn and experience more, that stuff will continue to change, as they do for literally every person. And
it's almost scary to think about, right? But the only reason I say that is because it goes back to what I was saying about, in the moment you don't want to let go of the things that are serving you, right?
Sure.
But I hate to tell you, but most things in life will work themselves out whether you want it to or not.
Sure. And now there are people who will hold on to the way things were, and they'll refuse to change, and they'll refuse to adjust, and they'll refuse to negotiate. And when we meet people like that, then we have to negotiate ourselves, our own boundaries, our own expectations, that they're not going to negotiate with me. Then what does that mean? Because then I'm going to need to make some calls. I'm going to need to decide for myself on certain things. And like you said, it is a painful process. But if there's, again, on this side of things, one thing I would want to highlight this is that change is not scary, or at least ideally it wouldn't be. It is by nature scary. But when we think about relationships, we need to maybe embrace the fact that change is always happening and renegotiations are always happening. And that's not bad. It just means that we need to stay in tune with that process and always be thinking about, how are my relationships shaping me, and how am I shaping them? And how is the relationship itself, the us, how is the us shaping each of us? Sometimes a situation of two well-meaning individuals can shape the individuals in a way that's not comfortable, and we have to renegotiate. Or maybe it's shaping one person in a seemingly not problematic way, but the other person is seeming to shape in a problematic way. We need to renegotiate then. And then it's this constant check-in of like, is this stuff shaping you? Is these relationships shaping you in a way that you're comfortable with? If the answer is yes, you should keep doing it. If the answer is no, then we need to renegotiate something somewhere. And if you need some help with that, book a therapy appointment. Come to somebody like your boy, and we got you. We can help you figure that one out.
Yeah. I know we're running a little bit low on time here, but we don't have to go quite yet. But something I think a good way, at least because it just kind of popped in my head, but I think it's very important, and I want to mention it on an episode like this before we close out. We've talked a lot about external relationships here, right? Friendships, romantic relationships, the people that are in our lives. But I think the way I want to close this episode out, Justin, is I think it's very important to remember that a lot of this starts with the relationship you have with yourself. And you can talk about family members and romantic partners and friendships, and we can go round and round and round. But if you're not happy with who you are as a person, who you are yourself, that stuff is going to trickle out into other areas of your life. And there may come a time where you have to reflect and realize, okay, maybe there's something I need to work on or something I need to do. Because I think it's very easy, and I'm guilty of it. I think most people are. I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of everyone else is the problem going on in my life. Mm-hmm. Well, I outgrew this relationship. Well, maybe, or maybe they outgrew something that is wrong in your life and that you just haven't reflected on. Mm-hmm. And the only way you get to those conclusions and you try to figure out things that you need to fix in your life is self-reflecting and being self-aware of the patterns in your life. And I kind of wanted to throw that at you and kind of like cap off this episode talking about just the relationship we have with ourselves.
If we're not willing to be accountable for the ways that we contribute to a relationship, whether we do so knowingly or unknowingly, we're really robbing ourselves of the ability to gain a whole lot of insight into ourselves and to relationships in general. And so we need to be aware of that. Again, going back to it, we're big here on Mental Caffeine. We're big about knowing yourself and trying to know who that is. And it's okay if you don't know. What's important is that you pay attention. And remember that you are always shaping these relationships, and they're shaping you. And the thing between the two of you, the us, is also shaping you. And you contribute to it. And that's not a bad thing. It's actually impossible to not do that, in my opinion. And so going back to what you say, Landon, and I'm glad you brought that up because I really want to highlight that. When we think about our relationship with ourselves, there's a couple points that I would want to make. One, you're not who you were. You're not who you were. And you're not who you will be. What matters is who are you today? Who are you today? And what kind of steps are we going to take, whether that's in your relationships, whether that's with yourself individually, whether that's progress towards a goal? What kind of steps are we going to take today to assist you in getting towards that person that you want to be? And that requires a few things. That requires knowing more about who it is that you want to be. A lot of us know what we don't want to be, Landon. Not a lot of us know what it is that we actually do want to be. So what is it that you do want to be? Get to know that person, and then take intentional steps to start becoming that person today. You're not who you were yesterday. Yesterday already happened. Who are you today?
Yeah.
Who are you today? And that's really, if it could be boiled down any simpler than that, who are you today? And what can we do today to take a step to who you want to be tomorrow?
I love that. I think that's that aspect of this whole conversation is something that's been relevant throughout my entire life, really. I think that I honestly can't think of a better place to kind of to leave it for now. But this is definitely a topic I'd love to. I would love to maybe in the future maybe dive into more just the relationship we have with ourselves. And I don't say that just as someone who's helping host a podcast, but I also just say that as an individual. That's something that I've been working on really for a long time, is the relationship with myself. And so it's just that kind of stuff is I kind of geek out about, and I look forward to maybe covering some of that. But Justin, episode 5 in the books.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And
Yeah.
boy, I love it. So if anybody wants us to get into anything specific, I'm here for that stuff, boy. I'm here for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll leave it at that. My name is Landon, and he's Justin, and this is Mental Caffeine, and we'll see you next time.